Look, we all know the bit. The Avatar of Khaine shows up. Something kills it. The comment section fills with Jobber of Khaine, like it's automated. One commenter put it with particular economy. The Saturday morning villain that gets bodied every week. Nobody replied to dispute it. 34 likes, 0 defenders, and 50 visible comments. That ratio is the joke, and the record earns it. In the first episode of Hammer and Bolter, the animated anthology series on Warhammer Plus, Episode 1, titled Death's Hand, the Avatar of Khaine dies. The killers are unnamed Primaris Space Marines, not a legendary champion, not a veteran of the Long War with a relic blade forged in the fires of the Horus Heresy. Marines, plural, doing their jobs. The entity described as a war god's divine fragment dies as ambient content in an episode whose central narrative concerns a Slaaneshi character study. TV Tropes records that the Avatar kills several of its attackers before going down, which the community found about as reassuring as a weather forecast promising only light rain during a flood. More recently, the Warhammer Plus episode, In the Garden of Ghosts, sends a Redemptor dreadnought, a squad of intercessors, and a gladiator tank against a single avatar. 3 separate weapons platforms, a coordinated combined arms strike against one entity. The community's response wasn't, "That seems like an appropriately overwhelming amount of force for a fragment of a literal war god." It was the same Jobber of Khaine energy, because the Avatar went down in a way that looked exactly like every previous Avatar appearance. A visual spectacle assembled to be destroyed. Then there's the Eondan conflict, where an Avatar challenged a Hive Tyrant to single combat, and the Hive Mind responded by sending 12 Carnifexes simultaneously to trample it to death. Because the Tyrannid Hive Mind simply doesn't do honorable duels. And the 5th edition Space Marine Codex reportedly contains background lore about Marneus Calgar, chapter master of the Ultramarines, killing an Avatar in hand-to-hand combat with his power fists. The kill presented as a bullet point in a character entry designed to establish how impressive Calgar is. The joke is earned. The record is documentably embarrassing. Nobody coming to defend the Avatar does so by pretending otherwise. But a record tells you what happened. It doesn't tell you what the thing is supposed to be. The actual lore, codex background text, the canonical architecture of Eldari theology, and the handful of moments where a writer actually paid attention to what they were depicting describes an entity that has no business dying in a streaming episode's background. GW's own product page says it plainly. An Avatar of Khaine is an ancient deity incarnate, a burning shard of Kala Mensha Khaine. Ancient deity incarnate. Their words, their product, their game. The gap between that phrase and the animated episode where unnamed Marines shoot one to death is the entire case. Before the exhibits, the foundation. Because the prosecution's argument rests on establishing what a burning shard of Kala Mensha Khaine actually means in the context of this setting. Kala Mensha Khaine. The name translates from the Eldari lexicon as Khaine the Bloody-Handed. He is documented in Eldari mythology source material, cited across codex editions from the 3rd edition codex Craftworld Eldar through the 9th edition codex Eldari, as the god of war, wrath, destruction, and murder. In the structure of the old Eldari pantheon, he was second in power only to Asuryan, the Phoenix King, oldest of all Eldari gods, the supreme authority of the divine order. Khaine was the first brother, which in the context of the Eldari mythos isn't a title of affection. It's a designation of divine precedence. His canonical achievements predate the 41st millennium by millions of years. During the War in Heaven, the ancient conflict between the Old Ones and the Necron-allied Catan, a war fought when the Eldari race itself was still a project being developed by the Old Ones. Khaine fought and defeated the Nightbringer. The Nightbringer is a Catan, a star god, an entity that had been feeding on stellar energy and the life forces of mortal creatures for geological epochs before the first Eldari ever looked up at a sky. It wasn't a warrior in any conventional sense. It was death made manifest at a cosmological scale. The Warhammer 40,000 fandom wiki, drawing on Kala Mensha Khaine's source entries, records the outcome. Khaine fought and defeated the Nightbringer, shattering its necrodermis. In the course of that battle, the Nightbringer's death essence seeped into Khaine's form, tainting him with what the text calls the aspect of the Reaper. That is the canonical origin of the bloody-handed epithet, not a metaphor, not a cultural honor, but the literal psychic residue of killing a star god absorbed permanently into the victor's divine substance. Khaine carries the essence of death because he killed death. Then came the fall. 30th millennium. The Eldari civilization collapsed under the weight of its own excess, and in that collapse, the psychic momentum of billions of lives burning out in hedonism erupted into the warp and birthed Slaaneshi, the chaos god of pleasure and pain, freshly born and immediately gorged on the essence of a species that had spent 10,000 years feeding it without knowing. Slaaneshi moved through the Eldari pantheon like fire through dry paper. Asurion, the Phoenix King and oldest of all gods, devoured. Lilith, the goddess of dreams, devoured. Morai Heg, the goddess of fate, who had seen everything coming and been powerless to stop it, devoured. Segarak, the laughing god, fled into the webway and survived by refusing to fight, disappearing into paths only he knew. Isha, goddess of healing and the harvest, was captured, and Nurgle heard her cries and wrestled her away from Slaaneshi, trading one imprisonment for another. She remains in Nurgle's garden to this day, forced to taste every plague he designs. Only Khaine rose to do battle. Picture that moment, a freshly born chaos god, not Slaaneshi in some later state of reduced power, Slaaneshi at the exact instant of maximum violence, swollen with the essence of most of the Eldari pantheon, carrying the psychic weight of billions of consumed souls. Against that, Khaine was the one remaining god who chose to fight, not to flee, not to yield, to stand in front of what had just eaten everything else and throw the first blow. He lost. A chaos god at the moment of its birth, already carrying the power of a dozen devoured divine entities, isn't something that loses to a single opponent, regardless of how formidable. Slaaneshi defeated Khaine. But, and this is the specific detail the writing room appears to misplace on a recurring basis, Slaaneshi couldn't consume him. The Eldari mythology entry, confirmed across multiple codex editions, preserves what happened next. Khorne intervened, claiming Khaine as his own by metaphysical right, since the god of war and the god of murder represent cognate forces. Two chaos gods fighting over one Eldari deity's essence, and in that conflict, Khaine's psychic core shattered. His essence scattered into the infinity circuits of surviving Eldari craft worlds. The canonical account from the Warhammer 40,000 fandom wiki, citing the Eldari mythology source text, Khaine, the mightiest warrior of the gods, did battle with Slaaneshi and was cast down and eventually shattered into 1,000,000 pieces, which became the avatars of Khaine that now belong within the infinity circuit of every Asuriani craft world. Mightiest warrior of the gods. That wording is in the source. Not significant, not among the more formidable, the mightiest. The one who actually fought Slaaneshi, the one who couldn't be consumed, who required the combined intervention of two chaos gods fighting each other just to be shattered rather than destroyed or devoured. Each craft world now houses one fragment of that shattered essence, dormant in a wraithbone idol, cold and lifeless, kept in a sacred chamber beneath the spires. The Warhammer 40,000 Avatar wiki entry is explicit. These are a single fragment of a true Eldari god. Not a replica, not a construct built in the god's image, a fragment, a piece of an actual god, sleeping in iron until called. When it's called, the ritual of the young king begins. The craft world chooses an exarch, not a rank-and-file warrior, but an exarch, a warrior who has walked the path of war so completely that the path has consumed their entire identity. Someone who can no longer exit the martial role that has replaced whatever they were before. This person becomes the young king. The craft world's infinity circuit gathers every excess psychic aggression housed within it, every warlike impulse of every soul bound in that circuit, every hatred and battle lust and martial fervor. All of it flows through the Wraithbone architecture toward the Avatar's shell. Gav Thorpe, who wrote the Path of the Eldar series, including Path of the Warrior, set on Craftworld Alatok, stated directly in a community discussion, "My thinking is that the sacrifice of the young king creates a psychic link to the other Eldari, more specifically, their warlike thoughts. The young king isn't just fuel. The young king is the channel through which the entire Craftworld's collective martial will is focused into the God Shard, making the Avatar not just a fragment of Khaine, but a vessel for the concentrated, violent intention of an entire population at war." Runes are carved into the young king's back, one rune per aspect of war, every discipline of Eldari martial practice inscribed in flesh. A golden cup, called the Chalice of Creel, catches the blood on some craft worlds. On others it flows freely, anointing the sanctum floor. The young king then carries the Avatar's weapon, the Suin Dalai, the Wailing Doom, into the inner sanctum alone. The doors close. The exarchs outside begin a hymn of praise to Khaine. What happens inside, no young king has survived to describe. The doors open again. The Avatar walks out, 3 times the height of a man, armored in shifting iron, the plates moving like tectonic formations, the gaps between them glowing with a slow pulse of cooling magma. Its hands drip with blood, always, the inheritance of the bloody-handed god, the blood of Eldanesh that has never dried in 10,000 years. Its eyes are burning furnaces. The Suin Dalai shrieks in its grip, runes writhing on the blade's surface as they struggle to escape the divine heat. The Warhammer 40,000 fandom wiki, drawing from Codex background text, states its blade can cleave main battle tanks in 2 and hack apart fortress gates, leaving only scraps of molten metal. Its flaming aura burns flesh at proximity. Those who witness it are described as looking upon the face of death and feeling the ancient alien anger of the Eldari made manifest. The same wiki classifies it as a deadly opponent even for the most mighty powers of chaos. That entity, that specific entity, is what GW keeps sending to die in animated anthology background events. Exhibit A, Death's Hand. Season 1, Episode 1 of Hammer and Bolter, the Warhammer Plus animated anthology. The Avatar dies. TV Tropes records it kills several of its attackers before the end. The killers are unnamed Primaris Space Marines, not champions with individual identities, not veterans with decades of exceptional service, not characters the episode bothers to name. Marines doing their jobs. The avatar of a war god is killed as set dressing in an episode whose actual story is a Slaaneshi character study. The entity exists in the runtime to be cleared out before the audience focuses on what the episode actually cares about. The Reddit thread titled, "My Honest Opinion, the fight scene in the first episode of Hammer and Bolter was garbage, exists, was upvoted, and wasn't meaningfully contested." The community's documented reaction across multiple threads. Eldar, especially the Avatar of Khaine, have often been the punching bag of 40K to make other factions look more powerful/brutal. That observation didn't arrive from nowhere. It arrived from watching Death's Hand. Now hold that, unnamed Marines, bolter fire, background death, against what the lore records when a writer actually remembers what the Avatar is. The novel Valador is a confirmed Black Library publication set during a Craftworld conflict against a Tyranid advance. At a critical moment in the battle, the Craftworlders are forced to do something that in the context of their culture and their theology should register as genuine desperation. They retreat and leave their avatar behind. Not a tactical withdrawal to regroup and reinforce, an evacuation. The Tyranid advance is overwhelming enough that the Eldari can't hold their position, and in pulling back, they must abandon the one entity that was supposed to be their divine shield. The Avatar, still burning, still armed with the Suindale, is left in the path of the swarm with no orders and no Craftworld to return to yet. Days pass. The Craftworlders return. When they reach the position they abandoned, the Avatar is there, still standing, still armed, still burning. Think about what Tyranid assault actually looks like over multiple days. Tyranids don't fatigue. They don't demoralize. They don't exhaust ammunition because they are the ammunition. Every biological weapon a Tyranid carries is part of its own body, regenerating between engagements, sustained by the same biochemistry that keeps it alive. The hive mind doesn't sleep, doesn't hesitate, doesn't reassess after suffering losses. It reads the battlefield in real time and floods more bioforms into any gap in the line as fast as synapse creatures can relay the signal. A multi-day Tyranid assault against a single position isn't a protracted siege in any conventional sense. It's a continuous biological flood, one organism after another, an endless tide pressed against whatever stands in its path. The Avatar stood in that path for days, alone. And when the Craftworlders came back, it was standing in the middle of what remained. No other lore entry captures the Avatar's divine endurance as clearly as this one, and it receives almost no mainstream attention because it doesn't make for a funny comment. Nothing to post about an Avatar that doesn't die. But the Valador moment, abandoned, without support, continuous assault, still standing, is the lore honoring its own theological claim. Ancient deity incarnate doesn't mean the strongest in every fight. It means you can't grind it down the way you grind down mortal warriors. You can't wait it out. You can't outnumber it into submission if you're operating on the assumptions of conventional warfare. The unnamed Marines in Death's Hand were apparently working from a different document. The 5th edition Space Marine Codex reportedly contains background lore where Marneus Calgar, chapter master of the Ultramarines, kills an Avatar of Khaine in hand-to-hand combat. Calgar drives his power fists through the Avatar's blade and kills it. Calgar is formidable. The armor of Antilochus is among the most powerful Terminator suits ever constructed. The gauntlets of Ultramar can punch through tank armor. He is a warrior with centuries of experience at the absolute apex of Space Marine capability. None of that is irrelevant. The issue isn't the quality of the kill. The issue is the format. The Avatar of Khaine, the entity GW's official fandom wiki describes as a deadly opponent even for the most mighty powers of chaos, whose blade cleaves battle tanks, whose flaming aura burns flesh at proximity, appears in Calgar's codex entry as background flavor text. Not a chapter in a novel where both combatants receive narrative weight. Not a pivotal moment in a campaign supplement where the engagement stakes are established and its cost documented. Background text in another faction's codex, rendered in the tone of a biography highlight reel. Marneus Calgar killed an Avatar of Khaine is how you write a sentence when the Avatar is a prop. When the Avatar is treated as anything more than that, the sentence requires a scene. A Space Marine chapter master defeating a war god's fragment should be a close thing, a cost, a moment the text devotes more than a clause to, a fight where the Avatar performs at the level its own codex entries establish, so that Calgar's victory means something rather than being administrative. Instead, it's a bullet point. The Avatar's death earns the same formatting weight as any other item in a character profile. The writing room's view of the Avatar's narrative function is legible in that formatting choice alone. Now against that, Skarbrand. Skarbrand isn't a generic greater demon of Khorne. He is a named, exalted entity, a bloodthirster cast out of the Khornate realm by the blood god himself, condemned to an existence of unending violent fury as punishment for being too uncontrollable even by Khorne's standards. His very presence degrades the reasoning of nearby entities. His axes have shattered the bones of demon princes. He is, by any metric this setting recognizes, an entity that should be above the Avatar's weight class in conventional fiction, because Khorne is one of the two Chaos gods who contended over Khaine's essence in the first place. The Avatar fights him anyway. The encounter, preserved in consistent detail across multiple sources, the Avatar opens at range, throwing the Suin Daile like a spear. The throw lands. The weapon impales Skarbrand. When the bloodthirster swings his axe in response, the Avatar catches the blow with its hand. Not dodged, not deflected with a parry. Absorbed. Bare hand against exalted chaos demon axe, and the avatar holds. Then it uppercuts him, lifts a bloodthirster off the ground, drives him back down onto the impaling spear to complete the kill. Both combatants die. Mutual kill. That is the Avatar performing exactly at the theological level its canon demands. A fragment of the god who fought the Nightbringer, who stood against Slaaneshi when every other Eldari deity fled, killing a named champion of the Chaos God whose entire metaphysical domain covers the same ground Khaine occupied. The Avatar doesn't survive the encounter. It dies, but it takes Skarbrand with it. And it does so not by outlasting him or finding a weakness, but by fighting at his level and winning the exchange by a single beat. Compare the choreography of that fight to Death's Hand. In Death's Hand, the Avatar's combat against unnamed Marines isn't described in the kind of specific, sequential detail that the Skarbrand encounter carries. TV Tropes records it kills some of them, which is about as granular as the writing apparently got. The episode didn't need the Avatar to be interesting in its final moments. It needed the Avatar to die. The Skarbrand encounter needed the Avatar to be what it is, so whoever wrote it actually wrote it that way. The Avatar doesn't have a power level. It has an author. During the Iyanden conflict against Hive Fleet Kraken, the Avatar's defeat is documented in Iyanden background lore appearing across multiple Codex editions. The Avatar moved to engage the Tyranid force and challenged a Hive Tyrant to single combat. Not unreasonable, a Hive Tyrant is the Tyranid's field commander, a synapse creature of enormous physical capability and psychic presence, and a war god fragment versus the Tyranid's most powerful direct combatant is exactly the kind of fight the Avatar exists for. The Hive Mind sent 12 Carnifexes instead. Carnifexes aren't small. A single Carnifex is a multi-ton living siege engine, armored in dense layers of biologically grown chitin, capable of punching through reinforced armor plating, designed for direct assault on fortified positions. 12 Carnifexes, stampeding in coordinated formation, represent a mass of biological violence that would flatten most things in this setting. The Hive Mind refused the duel and sent the equivalent of a tank column at a single target. There is a reading of this that is almost flattering. The Hive Mind processes every battlefield in real time across a galaxy-spanning consciousness. It assessed the proposed single combat and decided the Hive Tyrant was a bad trade for the engagement. It decided that 12 simultaneous Carnifexes was the appropriate counter. Not one, not 2, 12. Coordinated, overwhelming mass. If the Avatar were genuinely the Jobber of Khaine the memes suggest, the Hive Tyrant would have been fine. The Hive Mind calculated otherwise. That doesn't make trampled to death by 12 Carnifexes because the enemy refused the duel any less embarrassing as a record entry. Both things can be true simultaneously. Then there's Overfiend, a Black Library publication. An excerpt posted in community discussion reads, "There is a fragment of Kala Mensha Khaine, our god of war, on the planet. The orcs respond to it, and it to them." The context is an Eldari character noting the Avatar's presence and observing the orc population's reaction. Orcs don't revere things in the way softer species do. Orc respect is entirely structural. It flows towards strength as a physical force because their collective psychic field, Wa energy, is literally shaped by their belief in violence as the organizing principle of existence. When an orc mob responds to something, it's not processing cultural prestige or religious tradition. Its biology is registering something that resonates in the same metaphysical register as the most powerful warriors the universe has produced. The orcs don't know Khaine's name. They have no framework for Eldari theology, but their collective unconscious does the math anyway. The Avatar walks through their space and the orcs feel it the way they feel a proper war boss. Something in their own category. Something that belongs in the tier they understand as the highest tier. That recognition is itself a power statement. It doesn't require a kill count to make it. It's cosmological. The divine nature of the fragment announces itself to beings whose entire existence is an instrument for detecting exactly this kind of force. Sandy Mitchell's Primaris Khaine novel, Choose Your Enemies, records an avatar kill, a Slaaneshi demon in direct combat. An honest qualifier accompanies it. Commissar Primaris Khaine was present during the fight, operating a null rod, a psyker-nullifying device that would have weakened the demon's connection to the warp. Community discussion is split on whether the null rod caveat undermines the win. Taking the honest position, a Slaaneshi demon weakened by a null rod is still a chaos entity, still physically dangerous, still requiring active violence to destroy. The avatar still had to fight it and win. Fought a weakened chaos demon and killed it occupies a categorically different position on the scale than died to unnamed Marines in a streaming anthology. The Fulgrim situation requires direct attention because it reveals the structural problem more clearly than any individual win or loss. Multiple lore sources describe a battle between the Avatar and Fulgrim, demon primarch of the Emperor's Children, chosen champion of Slaanesh, one of the most powerful entities in the entire setting. A demon primarch represents the merger of a primarch's already extraordinary capabilities with the direct empowerment of a chaos god. Fulgrim specifically is Slaanesh's champion, which means he carries the essence of the very chaos god who defeated Khaine. One version of their encounter has them matching each other blow for blow, equal footing, neither finding clean advantage, two entities operating at the same tier. Another version has Fulgrim simply strangling the Avatar, crushing its neck, ending the fight with casual superiority. Both versions exist in published lore. Neither has been retconned. The community wiki aggregation on this encounter notes plainly that what exactly happened is contradictory and can't be reconciled between sources. This isn't the Avatar having a bad record. The lore is broken here. Not ambiguous, broken. Two accounts, published under the same franchise, describe incompatible outcomes for the same encounter. One version places the Avatar at the absolute peak of 40,000 combat capability. The other treats Fulgrim's victory as a demonstration of easy superiority. Neither is corrected, because correcting it would require someone in the writing room to maintain an internal standard for what the Avatar's performance actually looks like. No such standard appears to exist. This contradiction is more damning than any individual loss. Named characters get clarification. Major storyline inconsistencies get addressed. The Avatar gets to be simultaneously fought Fulgrim as an equal and Fulgrim strangled it easily because the writing room calibrates its performance to whatever the current scene needs, not to what the existing lore established. Lorgar's kill belongs in a footnote here, because the qualifier almost never travels with the loss when it gets recorded. Lorgar is a primarch, formidable in his own right, catastrophic in his later demon state. A loss to Lorgar wouldn't inherently be embarrassing. The primarchs are collectively among the most powerful beings in the setting, but the detail preserved in community sources notes that when Lorgar killed the Avatar, it was already heavily damaged and unable to stand. Lorgar didn't defeat the Avatar of Khaine. He finished off a wreck. That qualifier almost never makes the loss column. It gets recorded as killed by Lorgar in the tally, without the context that fundamentally changes what the incident actually demonstrates. There is a TV trope named for this exact narrative function, the Worf effect, documented by name in Tropedia's dedicated entry, is defined directly in the source text. Want a quick way to show how dangerous one of your unknown characters is? Simply make him win a fight or score points against a character that the audience already knows is a badass. Lieutenant Worf of Star Trek's The Next Generation was the most dangerous hand-to-hand combatant on the Enterprise. He consistently lost fights against guest villains because the writers needed a quick shorthand for "this new threat is serious." The pattern became so reliable that it acquired his name. The Avatar of Khaine is Warhammer 40K's Worf. When a Space Marine codex needs flavor text establishing a chapter master's combat pedigree, there's an avatar waiting. When an animated anthology needs its first episode to establish stakes and tone, there's an avatar. When a novel's background needs a named kill in its conflict history, the avatar fills the slot. The entity described in GW's official sources as a deadly opponent even for the most mighty powers of chaos gets drafted into service as a demonstration unit because it's available, it's visually spectacular, and it doesn't carry a protagonist's narrative armor. The Reddit community coined its own language for this. A thread asking, how should the Black Library wharf the Swarm Lord next? The word wharf, used as a verb, applied to another faction's icon with casual familiarity, documents how clearly the community sees the pattern. The Swarm Lord, canonically one of the most dangerous Tyranid entities ever produced by the Hive Mind, was slain by Chapter Master Dante of the Blood Angels during Hive Fleet Leviathan's invasion of Baal in Guy Haley's Devastation of Baal. One sentence for the Swarm Lord, because that's someone else's case to make, but it proves the pattern crosses faction lines. Non-humanoid faction icons get fed to Space Marines. The Avatar just does it more visibly, more often, and across more formats than most. A Facebook community discussion on the Avatar's operational threat level arrived at the assessment with involuntary precision. In theory, they're supposed to be able to stand toe-to-toe with a greater demon. In practice, as already mentioned, they're generally used as a punching bag for other factions to look more powerful/brutal. No campaign for correction, just an observation stated flatly, because the pattern is so established it has become background furniture. There's one more item from the loss column the record requires. Community sources describe Moggan Ra, a Phoenix Lord, a demigod-tier entity who has transcended normal Eldari mortality, the pinnacle of the aspect warrior tradition, stabbing an avatar through the heart. Not in combat, not as an enemy. To temper his weapon, the Mogatar, the Avatar of Khaine used as a forge test, the bloody-handed god's own fragment in the role of a whetstone for another warrior's weapon upgrade. The level of institutional indignity in that single incident is remarkable. It's not that the Avatar lost to someone stronger. Its purpose in that narrative beat is literally raw material, the God Shard as industrial component. Someone on r/Eldar, in a thread about fixing Eldar lore, wrote, "Make an explicit note to every single writer that if the Avatar is on the battlefield, several hundred Space Marines or equivalent should die before it falls." That isn't a power fantasy. It's a request for the writing room to honor the internal logic of its own source material. The Codex says the blade cleaves battle tanks. The Codex says it's a deadly opponent for Chaos's mightiest powers. The request is simply, write it that way. A community member on r/40k lore summarized the operational reality. An Avatar of Khaine pretty much exists to be a glorified punching bag that usually shows up to get its ass kicked by a named character to show how tough that character is. That sentence is written in the tone of someone stating established fact, and as a description of GW's demonstrated writing room practice, it's accurate. Pull the evidence together and the picture is clean. What the confirmed lore actually establishes: a fragment of the god who defeated the Nightbringer, a Catan, a star god, during the war in heaven. A fragment of the god described in the Eldari mythology source text, cited through multiple codex editions as the mightiest warrior of the gods. A fragment that couldn't be consumed by a freshly born chaos god at full power, requiring two chaos gods fighting over it just to shatter rather than destroy. GW's own product page. An ancient deity incarnate. The Warhammer 40,000 fandom wiki, a deadly opponent even for the most mighty powers of chaos. A blade that cleaves main battle tanks in two. In Valador, standing alone for multiple days against continuous Tyranid assault, still burning when the Craftworlders returned. Against Scarbrand, a named exalted greater demon of Khorne, in mutual kill achieved by barehanding an exalted axe blow and uppercutting a bloodthirster into an impaling spear. In Overfiend, recognized as a war deity by orc biology operating without any cultural framework for Eldari religion. What the writing room keeps producing. A background death in a streaming episode about something else. A Codex biography bullet point for a Space Marine chapter master. Trampled by 12 Carnifexes because the enemy declined the duel. Finished off by Lorgar while already wrecked, though the qualifier rarely travels with the record. 2 incompatible accounts of whether it fought Fulgrim as an equal or was strangled easily, because the setting maintains no consistent internal standard for its performance. A forge test for a Phoenix Lord's armament, taken down by combined tank and infantry strike in another animated episode. Both columns belong to the same entity. Only one of them remembers what it is. There is a phrase that circulates in 40K discourse. The biggest threat to a custodes is the writer. The Avatar situation demonstrates that this operates at a systemic level, not an individual one. Specific authors don't occasionally get the Avatar wrong. The writing room has a recurring editorial need: establish stakes, provide a character profile highlight, show the new threat is serious, and the Avatar is permanently on call to fill it. It doesn't carry a protagonist's protection. It doesn't have a Space Marine chapter to act as its narrative guardian. It's a non-humanoid faction icon, which means it exists in the writing room's toolkit as a demonstration unit, impressive enough to make the kill look good, unprotected enough to clear the frame for whatever the scene actually cares about. The question isn't whether the Avatar is powerful. The lore answers that question, clearly and repeatedly, across Codex editions stretching back to the 2nd edition, across the theological architecture of Eldari mythology that documents what was shattered and why, across every novel where a writer paused long enough to remember what they were working with. The mightiest warrior of the Eldari gods, fighting Slaaneshi while the rest of the pantheon fled, standing alone for days against a tyrannid swarm, killing Skarbrand in the kind of mutual death that honors what both entities were. That is the Avatar. That is what GW's own source material established. The question is why the writing room keeps forgetting. Why the entity whose own product page says ancient deity incarnate keeps dying in background scenes, keeps filling biography bullet points for Marines, keeps being the wharf in the sequence when the script needs a shorthand for, "This fight is dangerous." The answer isn't mysterious. The Avatar is available. It doesn't require protagonist treatment. It provides a visually spectacular death and clears the frame for whatever the episode actually cares about. It's not protecting any particular faction's sales narrative. It's there to be impressive, then to die, then for the camera to move on. The biggest threat to the Avatar of Khaine isn't Slaaneshi, who couldn't consume it, isn't Khorne, who could only shatter it, isn't 12 Carnifexes stampeding because the hive mind refused the fair fight. It's whoever is writing the episode this week and needs something impressive to die in the first act. The lore has the receipts. The writing room has a pattern. The gap between those two things is the entire case. And the Avatar of Khaine has been building it, defeat by defeat, for every Codex edition since the 3rd. Subscribe for more stories like this one.